The whole meeting of the Beaumont City Council. I will begin to read the Indigenous greeting before we begin our meeting. We are pleased to be here today on the traditional territory of Treaty 6 and the Métis homeland. We acknowledge all those who share a deep connection with this land. The City of Beaumont respects the histories, languages, and cultures of all Canada's First Peoples, whether they be of First Nation, Métis, or Inuit descent, and appreciates that their presence continues to enrich Canada's vibrant communities. We're all treaty people. The peace treaties bind us all. Administration, is any modification to the agenda to be made this evening, please?
Thank you, Chair. Administration has no changes to the agenda this evening.
Thank you. Is there a committee member willing to move the agenda as presented?
Move, Your Worship.
Thank you, Mr. Hendricks. All those in favor, please vote accordingly. Motion carries 7-0. Thank you very much. First order of business is our presentation and delegations. 3A, affordable housing, presented by Ms. Emily Sangster, Long Range Planner, City of Beaumont. Ms. Sangster, are you with us?
I am.
Thank you. You have the floor. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Good evening, everyone. Mr. Chair, councillors. As was mentioned, I'm Emily Sangster. I'm a Long Range Planner. I'm the project lead for the Affordable Housing Strategy. With me is Kim Williston, Director of FCSS, who has been a major partner in developing this strategy, given its connection to the goals of the Social Master Plan. So the strategy has been in progress since late last summer, and we're here this evening to give an overview of the process and the draft strategy, and to provide an opportunity for questions or comments that you might have. Specifically, we'll give some background on the rationale for the strategy, our process developing it, key housing needs in Beaumont that have been identified, and the proposed strategic directions and actions before we have time for discussion. I also wanted to acknowledge at the outset Councillor Barnhart's role as chair of the board of the Leduc Regional Housing Foundation, another of our major partners in the strategy, and her support for this initiative and for developing affordable housing options in our region. So I'll start with a bit of background on the rationale for the strategy. It's an action item in our 2019 Municipal Development Plan, and it aligns with other directional plans and policies that we have, including the Social Master Plan and our age-friendly strategy that's in progress. It also supports direction from the Edmonton Region Growth Plan to plan for all communities in the region to develop as complete communities, which include a range of housing options to suit different household types, different life stages, and different incomes. There's also a range of research indicating that affordable housing and its capacity to help households reallocate money and time for other purposes can support individual household well-being, but also engagement in the broader community and the health of local businesses. In the strategy, I wanted to note also that we've used the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation's definition of affordable, which is housing that costs less than 30% of a household's gross income. This can mean very different things for different households, and the strategy has endeavored to take this into account. So our process in developing the strategy has unfolded in two general stages. The first one was focused on understanding needs locally, and the second has been focused on developing a strategy that addresses those needs. We've had support throughout the process from the consulting firm Urban Matters, who have provided an advisory and a peer review role for our engagement plans and our reports, and they've also contributed their knowledge of best practices in the development of the strategy. So we started in summer 2020 with project and engagement planning and consultant hiring. Based on our meetings with our working group and public and stakeholder engagement in the fall, we developed a needs assessment that was reviewed by the working group and then formed the basis for strategy development. And that was attachment 1 in the package this evening. Based on the working group input, best practices guidance from Urban Matters, and some additional research, we've developed the draft strategy that was the other component of tonight's package and was also circulated to the working group. We had a final meeting with our working group last week, incorporating key comments from them from that meeting and any arising from our discussion this evening. The strategy is to be released for an additional round of public and industry stakeholder consultation beginning next week for 3 weeks. And the intent is to consider that feedback and bring a final strategy to council for adoption no earlier than August 2021. And if we find, based on our upcoming engagement, that some additional consultation or some additional work is needed, we're prepared to pivot and with the timeframe for council approval into Q4 of this year. And ultimately, we look forward to continuing to work with our stakeholders, with industry partners to put the strategy into practice, because affordable housing development is a very collaborative activity. So I'll give a quick overview of the key needs identified in our needs assessment. It found that, first of all, the majority of Beaumont households are able to find a suitable and affordable home in the private market here. We're not seeing the same broad affordability concerns as, for example, Vancouver or large parts of Southern Ontario. That said, the assessment did identify gaps in 4 key areas. First of all, in market affordable rental housing, especially 1-bedroom apartments suitable for smaller households. Second, non-market housing or below market housing, again, especially 1-bedrooms, suitable for households on lower or fixed incomes, especially youth and singles and seniors. Third, access to emergency shelter and transitional housing options locally. Our working group members have advised that there's a particular need in this area for shelter that serves youth, single adults facing long-term unemployment, and adults and children affected by family violence. And finally, there's a need for supportive housing options that are affordable and accessible, particularly serving seniors and people with disabilities. And so our draft strategy was developed in response to these. The vision of the strategy was developed with the working group and presented for feedback in our first round of public engagement. And it is that Beaumont is an inclusive, equitable community offering a diversity of safe, affordable housing options that meet the needs of all residents. And so based on our needs, the strategy identifies targets that specifically address both overall affordability as well as each of the key needs. It also identifies 4 strategic directions that focus on, respectively, the direct municipal role, community and industry partnerships, public engagement and education, and advocacy to senior levels of government. I won't list each action individually now, although we can certainly discuss specific actions. I'll just sort of summarize that under strategic direction 1, the actions focus on how the city processes and policies and land and financial resources might be intentionally deployed in support of the housing that's needed. Under strategic direction 2, the actions focus on where administration can effectively direct its attention to close information gaps with housing sector partners and promote needed housing that way. Under strategic direction 3, actions focus on ensuring that residents and administration have a common understanding of some of the needs and concerns related to housing affordability so that those can be addressed as early in development processes as possible. And finally, under strategic direction 4, the actions focus on where we can direct housing-related advocacy to regional, provincial, and federal governing bodies. So at our working group meeting last week, there was agreement on the general direction and generally on the actions. However, there were some notable changes proposed, and these were, first of all, that targets regarding non-market housing and emergency shelter should be revised downwards to reflect how complex it is to develop these types of housing. Second, that a recommendation should be added or revised under strategic direction 1 to investigate the feasibility and the impact of waiving municipal fees and taxes for eligible affordable housing developments. Third, that the recommendation regarding youth emergency shelter should be revised to account for the role of children's services in this area. And fourth, that a recommendation should be added about the need for a regional approach to emergency shelter for adults. And so these recommendations will be incorporated to the greatest extent possible before the engagement begins to ensure that public and industry stakeholders can address them in their comments. And so with that, I thank you very much for your attention and invite any questions or comments for me or for Kim regarding the process, findings, recommendations, or potential implementation of the strategy.
Thank you, Ms. Sangster. I do appreciate the presentation, as does council as well, the committee of the whole. Are there any questions for our presenter this evening from committee members? Kathy, Ms. Barnhart, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair Dunluck. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to this first off, and I always have questions, but I think those questions are more conversation and just some of the understanding of this area, because I spend a lot of time working on this, being the chair of the Duke Regional Housing Board. But first off, I just have to say I am very impressed with the comprehensiveness of this report. Probably now maybe I'm biased, but I think this is one of the best reports I've seen. It does cover just about anything I could think of that we needed to ask a question about. And again, strategy depends on so many different factors, but I'm sure there'll be questions from councillors about that. But generally, you know, there's things about the report that I would say that I don't know whether it's to do with the fact that you were as involved in this as you were from a staff perspective, or the great work that was being done with the consultants as well. But somehow that combination really has paid off, I think. And what I see here is very comprehensive and up to date. Having been to a couple of conferences and symposiums and things lately, I'm, again, very impressed that you have as much in there as you do. So as you can tell, I like the report. So the questions that I wanted to lead off with was just in terms of the municipal, provincial, and if you want to throw in there, federal role, and how this strategy is going to help us. And Emily, I'll start with you, and Kim can weigh in as well if she feels that she has something that she'd like to say about that. But knowing what we've been through lately in Leduc, trying to get an affordable housing project off the ground is extremely difficult. And it's not because we don't have a great proposal, it's just about all of the layers of government having to work together. And I guess I'm just jumping right to that. I mean, I know there's a lot of other things we can do. We can get one project at a time, but to make a big impact, we really need provincial and federal dollars to coincide with municipal support. Anything you want to say about that, just to kind of kick off the conversation, and then I'll let others ask questions as well.
Certainly, and I appreciate the vote of confidence. The strategy, from what I've kind of learned and gathered from Urban Matters as well in preparing the strategy, a really key municipal role in the provision of affordable housing is, first of all, making sure that our regulatory structures and our processes make it as smooth as possible to have these kinds of developments, to ensure that we remove barriers wherever possible to making them happen. So that's something that we've tried to address in the strategy. I should note that we are, it was noted by a few of our developers in the engagement sessions that we have in fact gotten quite a lot of the way there in terms of our new our land use bylaw and the approach that has taken. And that was noted by Urban Matters as well. It was noted that that is something we're trying to leverage in the strategy and really get the most out of that. So that's one key municipal role for us. An additional one that's been noted is our capacity to make that municipal role clear when we are approaching, or potential developers are approaching other levels of government for some of the funding that they may have available. I think funding that may be available from the province may change over the next little while, just because they have recently completed a major review of affordable housing structures in Alberta. But certainly the federal government has many different funding programs available at the moment, and it can be very helpful for developers wanting to take advantage of those to know that there is municipal support behind the applications.
And if I may just ask one supplementary to that, did I miss it, or is there any recognition of the fact that the municipality could dedicate some land to a project? Is that in here? I think I saw some recognition, but is it in the strategy itself?
The intention is that the recommendation relating to the land management strategy, and then the subsequent recommendation relating to identifying potential locations for affordable housing development is to address that. So once we have affordable housing as a potential objective or goal of the strategy, then if we are identifying particular sites or general criteria for identifying sites for housing development, that municipal land could be included in that.
And this could enable the municipality to dedicate some land to it without
That's right.
adding that to the cost of the project. Well, I will stop there. I would like to hear what my colleagues have to say and questions they have. but I may pipe in again later, but thank you very much so far. I appreciate the work on this.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question will come from Committee Member Monkoff-Swain, followed by Committee Member Van Nieuwkerk. Sam, you have the floor.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Chair. And yeah, Kathy, you acknowledged up front, and also Emily, you mentioned as well, just the amount of effort that went into pulling this together. It was a fascinating read for me. Unlike Kathy, I'm not ingrained in this sort of thing, and so I read every word of this report, and probably one of the most fascinating pieces that I've read over these 3.5 years. So thanks for the work in doing it. I won't say eye-opening, but certainly framed a lot of the context and such an important discussion that I'm glad it's here at this table now that we can move forward with it. I was going to ask a process question first before kind of diving into it, because I don't want to dive too deep into some of my questions if it's not the appropriate time. So maybe from a broader perspective, obviously the next step in this is on the engagement, that next round of engagement. A lot of the questions I've got, I'm just not sure if this is the appropriate time. So more from an administration perspective, what are you looking for from council here in terms of our input? Is it kind of the green light to move to the next step, or do you want us to weigh in a bit more deeper? I want to be clear on what administration is looking for.
I think for the most part, we are looking for clarification that the direction of the strategy kind of is the right one based on the information that's been provided. And also, if you do have any questions or concerns regarding the feasibility of some of the actions, concerns about potential implementation, or anything that we might not have considered.
Okay, thanks. I'll keep my questions at a higher level then. And so while the background information was great, I just wanted to acknowledge that the most important section for me is that 4.5 in that action plan, right? And you at a very high level touched on a couple of those things, and that's where Councillor Barnhart's question around the action 1.3 there, where we're talking about the land management strategy there, and how do we actually do that? Because I think what I've struggled with this is I've heard Kathy talk about this. I've been to a few of those discussions with Nancy and co. And what I've struggled with is, okay, what can we actually do? What can the city, what can the 7 of us up here, what can we vote for that's going to make some action? And I just wanted to acknowledge that section 4.5 goes into a lot of that detail. It seems like it's very, very realistic in terms of the timelines of when that could be implemented. I especially like 3.3, where you talk about tracking and actually reporting back, not only to council, back to the community, that those are such important steps. So yeah, directionally, maybe I'll leave others for specific questions, but I really like that action plan, and the same thing that we always say when these larger documents come in front of us is making sure that these are actionable, and I think what you're going to be going forward now is that engagement piece. Make sure we get that confirmation, then kind of council finalizing it, and then obviously it comes into a budgetary discussion that'll come as part of our regular budget process. But directionally, the overall read was excellent. Certainly a gap, and you guys have identified that very well here. So just thanks for all the work to pull them all together. I'll yield here and to see if there are other more general comments before coming back for some specifics. So, but yeah, I thought it was an excellent report, and looking forward to seeing that next level of engagement.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next question will from Committee Member Van Nieuwkerk, followed by Committee Member Hendricks. Steve, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you. Definitely lots to read with those ones. Thank you for putting those together, and I'll echo the sentiments of well done and add well organized in there as well. A couple of themes for me. One is affordable funding, who needs it and when and why, and the communication surrounding that. And the second will be around funding. So just on the first theme with affordable housing, we have a definition section and an introduction section, and we have a great document here. When it comes to the communication of this document, will there's another round of engagement to come, and I know that's part of the communication process with this document. But when this document is signed, sealed, and delivered, where will we build in the community communication of this strategy, besides just coming into a council meeting and discussing it and saying we support this strategy, or the input has been here, we did these engagement? The reason I ask this question is because it seems that time and time again, the discussions around affordable housing miss the mark on the, so I made some notes here, the who and the why for affordable housing. And often, because of that, you'll see local pushback to initiatives, and it's very common. You don't have to read too far into some of the larger, affordable housing developments that have been done even in the capital region in Edmonton. Some of the strategies have been reimagined around that. Getting the community involved in the development of those types of things. So, where and how will we put some extra effort into the who and why this is required, and bring an extra layer of communication to this document out front?
I think it's an excellent question, because, as you say, some of the concerns arise regarding who and why in so many affordable housing developments. There is an element in the strategy that kind of aims to provide additional opportunities to kind of engage at a high level regarding affordable housing, sort of with the broader community, whether that be through quarterly meetings or other strategies regarding helping people to understand the development process. And that gives administration an opportunity to kind of talk about potential affordable housing developments without perhaps a specific application there that may invite specific concerns. So if an application comes in, the hope is that interested members of the public have a greater understanding of how concerns can be addressed, and who the development is likely to serve. There's also an intention to make sure that the reporting that does come back regularly as part of affordable housing implementation doesn't simply go to council, but is intended to be as broad as possible in terms of readability, so that it can be communicated more widely beyond a council meeting and help to keep this a little bit closer in the public eye. But it's a concern that we recognize. It's something that we have observed in other communities, and so it is top of mind in communicating it.
Yeah, I guess a direct question, when I look at the strategy, it feels to me like we're actually missing a communication section. Or is that too tactical in a plan such as this strategy? That's what I'm weighing in my mind right now.
That's a good question. I think the best thing for me to do might be to take that back to our team and kind of discuss that further and see whether that is something that we can incorporate.
Yeah, or sprinkle through, right? Like, if it doesn't fit in a section. I just think it's so important because it doesn't take long for messages to be lost or misinterpreted or misinformed, and we see that time and time again. And an important topic like this, I think we should do what we can to try and guide this in a better direction, because we have an opportunity right now, right? So that's enough on the communication side. Another section that I was looking for and wondering about in the strategy was something around funding. One of the things I often hear, and it may be for all the right reasons, but have we challenged it, is that it's hard to get the three levels of government to align to get these things done, these things being affordable housing. So knowing and understanding that is a difficult thing to do and can be a difficult thing to do, and thinking through Councillor Barnhart's avenue about land in kind as being a part of this. Are we missing a section on funding per se? Should we continue to wait around for the municipal, provincial, and federal governments to get aligned and push that strategy, or are there other potential funding sources that aren't tax dollars? What in this strategy looks for external investment or other financial tools to finance these projects? And I think a strategy that just keys in on funding coming from the government might miss the mark, if we don't have, a section that discusses and thinks about, other ways to fund a project. So maybe just some comments on funding and a section, or how we could incorporate some of those ideas.
Certainly, yes, there are some actions that we acknowledge do need additional work to be done in terms of, if we're exploring the development of an affordable housing reserve fund, we have more work to do on options for capitalizing that fund and how that might happen, for example. But if there's an appetite to have more of that detail in the strategy at this time, that's something that we can explore further.
Yeah, I think for me, like, I'd be interested to see what other councillors think about that. But for the funding path to be focused in on municipal, provincial, federal tax dollars, and for the funding part of the funding strategy not to just even to explore additional investment opportunities from other investment bodies or groups, or other financing options through other financial groups, we might be missing an opportunity. So. That's my comments for now, I guess. Maybe other councillors will have thoughts on either of those topics. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next question will come from Committee Member Hendricks, followed by Committee Member Steward. Perry, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The affordable housing package issue has been around for a long, long time. And the number one issue is consistent. It's math and money. It's the pro forma. How do you take the pro forma and try to isolate items in the pro forma so that you can make it more affordable? So one of the strategies that Leduc Foundation took up many moons ago was the idea that the FAR, the floor area ratio of, say, for example, Plainview, could be expanded on the same lands. And as a result, at that time, we expanded Plainview to where it is today. That way, on the pro forma package, math wasn't, the land that was tied to the math was no longer at play. The utilities, parking, all these other things that would be otherwise in the pro forma were taken out of the pro forma, which made it, quote, affordable. Then there's Habitat for Humanity's approach, which is, okay, they get after the land piece, but they also get after the labor. So they have a thing called the frame game, where contractors like myself donate time and effort to frame up these facilities, houses, apartments, what have you. Again, that comes out of the pro forma, which is what they're trying to do, which is try to attack that sheet somehow and take as much out of it as they can without having to pay money for it. Land is, of course, another approach, as Councillor Barnhart suggested, that we dedicate lands to that idea. That comes off the pro forma sheet. Makes a huge difference to the overall equation. You have City of Edmonton's actually got an affordable housing strategy, which includes ownership if you're selling condos and things like that, right? A project large enough that a percentage of that would have to be under market as part of the development permit agreement. So that's then their approach. Taxes is another approach. How do you tax those lands afterwards? And then there's things like life leases that could be in place under nonprofits that are doing multiples. And again, it's a way to get rid of admin costs. So everything you do is attacking the pro forma sheet. Beauregard Manor, when we built that, when Beaumont built that back in the day, it was because there was land available behind, right? And we did the affordable housing piece back there with Leduc Foundation. And then multiple levels of government came in, but the land was already there. So you have to take that pro forma sheet and get after it. I sat on the St. Albert Affordable Housing Group, and same thing. Genstar stepped up with land, and a bunch of things got done. So you got to get things off the sheet somehow, and you got to attack it from every which way. So because you can't do it the conventional way. You can't get to those rates. You can't get to those numbers otherwise, given the income levels you're dealing with. So thanks.
Thank you, Committee Member Hendricks. Next, we have Committee Member Stewart, followed by, that'll be an end of round one. So then I'll come back to everybody else for round two. So John, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Appreciate it. just leading off, this is a great report. I found it to be a really interesting need, or sorry, not need, read. It highlighted some really interesting needs and some really interesting comments that that flowed throughout the document through the last round of public engagement. Traditionally, though, municipalities have been picking this ball up and running with it in what is traditionally, this is usually a provincial area of responsibility, because the dollars involved are just incredible to be able to build these projects, as Councillor Hendricks was just saying. So my question is we're trying to tackle this into three phases: low income and seniors, market affordable rents for people that we just don't have enough 1-bedroom housing stock, supportive housing options, and emergency and transitional housing options. It seems like a monumental task. How are we going to chunk this down into bite-sized chunks? Like, I'm going to ask the same question that Councillor Munkhoff-Swain had. What can the 7 of us actually do? And what can we do as a municipality to accomplish this? Because the tax dollars at a municipal level aren't going to be there to do this work in its entirety.
Oh, sorry, I just had a comment for me. Yeah, it is a large task. There's many facets, I think, as have been pointed out, for kind of approaching the issue of affordable housing, and as it was phrased, kind of taking things off the pro forma balance sheet. One of the things that we've tried to focus on here in that regard is kind of the opportunity to have partnerships to help us identify maybe some of the opportunities that are out there where we can start or where we can focus and seize opportunities that come by. The intention is also to, in setting targets for each individual type, to give us a sense of kind of how we're doing as we go, and to be monitoring that as we go along. So it's difficult to say how easy each one will be to achieve off the top, but in setting the targets, the intention is that we know where we need to go in each area, and we can work toward it. I don't know if, Kim, you have anything to add on that, especially as it relates to maybe emergency housing.
Yes, if I could make an additional comment, particularly in regards to that emergency transition type shelter, accommodation or housing, that is actually a topic of conversation at the regional level amongst my colleagues and partners, Leduc County, City of Leduc. So that discussion is happening because we see that as a need regionally. So I'm going to suggest to you that this plan that we're bringing forward to you wouldn't specifically lay out the plan for that type of accommodation. That will be something that will be worked on regionally, and potentially a report would come back through that mechanism and not specifically through this one. I'd also say that as far as the non-market affordable housing, there is a very strong relationship that certainly the city has through the FCSS department with Leduc Regional Housing Foundation. And so there are ongoing conversations about what that's going to look like for Beaumont, how we can leverage some of their skills, their expertise. I would say particularly in that funding area, Leduc Regional Housing Foundation has access to grants that as a municipality we may not. So it's really in those partnerships that we can support one another to be able to move this forward as far as the non-market affordable housing is concerned.
I appreciate your comments, Kim, and that's great. I have had some conversations lately in the last couple of months with Mayor Gandam from Wetaskiwin, Mayor Young, and Mayor DeBlanco from City of Leduc and County of Leduc, respectively. So it's nice to hear that we are involved in those conversations, because I know they're driving forward on a number of initiatives that it would be very easy for us to tag into to start having to mitigate some of these needs. Second question, if I may, Mr. Chair.
Please proceed.
In a similar vein, one thing I did notice, but I'm not seeing in the 4 key needs in the strategy, is there was some, for lack of better words, some wraparounds, some supports that need to be in, and one of them was transit, both within the city and better connectivity to the city of Edmonton, or maybe perhaps City of Leduc. and things from like medical needs, just like better access to diagnostics, doctors, things like that. Where would that fit into this plan, or is that more social master plan versus affordable housing, or do they tie?
I believe they do tie in. I may let Kim speak more broadly to how they tie in detail with the social master plan.
Absolutely. So transportation is always an issue, and an issue of affordability and accessibility. So through the affordable housing, that was very much identified as a key need, and also through the social master plan, that was identified in those recommendations that there be affordable, accessible transportation, not only into the major centres such as Edmonton, but within the community as well. So that is certainly something that has been identified through both reviews, and I'm hopeful that affordability piece will be coming when our new transit system is integrated. So that's always an issue. The wraparound services, absolutely. Without those supports, it is very difficult to meet the basic needs of our residents that are looking for affordable housing. Very often they will need those mental health supports, those career type development, job skills supports. So that piece is critical. There are some great models in affordable housing where those wraparound services are actually co-located in some of those affordable housing builds. Childcares are also included. So depending on the model, I think there's lots of opportunities to perhaps even incorporate that in an affordable housing build. So there's a lot of good examples out there where this has been done, and quite successfully.
I appreciate those comments, because I do know before COVID hit, I was having some really interesting conversations with Covenant Health about bringing those in. I'd be happy to go restart those conversations now that COVID, it seems to be pivoting away from us. And if you wish, and seeing if we can get built into this plan, because those supports and those things are going to be critical for our community. So appreciate it. Thank you. Mr. Chair, that's me for now.
Thank you, committee members and presenters. That concludes round one of questions. We do have a round two coming up. I have a couple of questions coming from committee members, so I'll try and keep the next section to about 15 minutes if we can. I won't curtail anybody from speaking, but we'll try and keep it to about a 15-minute cap. Our first question will come from committee member Barnhart, followed by committee member Munkoff-Swain. Kathy, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I really do appreciate the conversation that we're having. Mayor, when you bring up the question of, well, how do we tackle this? This is huge. Well, that's an age-old problem, isn't it? It's kind of like, well, we can't stay here and do nothing. We have to move forward. And why I did appreciate the comprehensiveness of this strategy, and it's not 100 action steps. It's 6, 3, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. It's about 14 or 15 action steps. And I do think that would take us a long way forward. So I really do appreciate that it does seem doable. One I wanted to pick on specifically, again, thinking about what can we do immediately, kind of in the short term. One of the things that happened when the government changed, well, no, actually when the Metropolitan Regional Board changed, is we dropped the housing subcommittee that had been set up regionally. And we left it with transportation and land. And I think there might've been one other one, but housing had started off to be a regional priority, and it disappeared. Leduc Regional Housing Foundation was very disappointed when that happened, very disappointed, because those conversations were so critical. We know that every municipality, Beaumont, Devon, Leduc, can't have every type of housing and every type of support service. And as a region, we can, but not as individual municipalities. That's not affordable, nor is it needed in some cases, but you don't know you need it until you need it. So I think it behooves us to bring that back to the table. So I look to you, Mayor, hoping now or in the future when you're doing a strategic plan with the Metropolitan Regional Board, you might consider putting this back on the table and suggesting, and I know that I think it's 4.1 seems to suggest that, although it doesn't say it quite specifically the way I am, but a housing subcommittee at the regional table would go light years towards moving this forward. I think we're more ready for it now than we were before, and probably because so much good work has been done with Councillor Monkoff-Swain and the work on the Transit Committee. I mean, we can do a lot of work on housing together in this region. So I would just want to say, if that could be specifically fleshed out a little bit more in the strategic plan, I'd appreciate that as well.
Yeah, no, and actually, I think you're hitting the nail on the head. We at the EMRB, I think it is time to bring that back up on the table. We do have the MSR, the servicing plan is in an implementation phase. We just wrapped the IRTMP, the Transportation Master Plan. As you mentioned, Transit Commission is in full swing. It might be time to bring that piece back to the table because the supporting work has been done. So it's be happy to champion that.
Appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next question will come from Committee Member Monkoff-Swain, followed by Committee Member Van Newkirk. Sam, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. And I know you're trying to get through this quickly. I could speak about this for 5 hours, so I'll try to be concise. First, let me just acknowledge what Councillor Barnhart just mentioned there in terms of that call to action at the regional level, and I would echo that. Thank you for bringing that up, Kathy. John, that's what we need you to do here. Thank you. I won't be any more eloquent than Kathy. So I'll just leave it at that. But thank you for raising that, Kathy. I'll go through these points as quickly as I can. On the, your worship, you also talked about, the fact of transit and these other things just outside of affordable housing, and I couldn't agree more. And yes, there has been a lot of work done at the regional level, but the key word that I heard from Ms. Williston here is affordable transit, right? It still was costing folks $5 to get into Edmonton, right? And I don't, that is challenging because then you have to pay another $3.25. This was back in the day when I was catching the bus to get back in further, right? So that's still cheaper than an Uber or a taxi, but that's challenging, right? And so we've got to look at, from a city perspective, what can we do from that transit piece. So I just offer that out there. I don't think it necessarily fits, but I just, affordable transit. Yes, we made some progress, but we've got to also dive into some of those other deeper issues. If I could just link us back to the actions again, and sorry for going back to these, but I think this is where I get more excited about it, and I'll specifically speak. I'm on page 154 for those following along. The first one talks about 1.1. We've got the accelerated approval process, and we talk about these aspirational things there. But when we get down into action 2, dedicated staff time and resources to support this, and then 2.2, that promotional material piece, I view this similarly as how we're trying to attract new investment into our city, and we're trying to get new businesses. We don't just sit back and wait for it to happen. We took a very aggressive approach. We restructured, the city restructured and put a lot of resources into it, and we went out and did a lot of promotion and marketing around that. So I absolutely agree with that approach. I think that's crucial here. It's not just going to happen, just like previously industry or businesses didn't just happen to come to Boneless. So I think those are 2 key focuses that I really picked up on. So I definitely encourage that conversation. But my broader question here, and maybe for Mr. Dowler or Ms. Williston, is how do these, when you talk about these, dedicated staff time and, materials, how does this actually show up in the budget process? How does this connect back in to, let's say this program gets approved and implemented, how does that show up from a line item perspective in the budgeting process?
From a very simplistic process standpoint, what you would expect to see from a budget perspective when it gets presented to council in the fall would be some items that are identified through the strategy here, either funded and certainly some of them unfunded as specific service requests. So as in just a simple example, if we were looking to add some resources from an administrative perspective to spend some dedicated time on an affordable housing file and pursuing some of those aspects that have been discussed tonight. You would expect to see a service request specifically for that individual with certain costs attached to it as part of the budget process. And then the expectation would be council would have some debate, deliberation around that service request in and amongst some others that would be coming forward and trying to narrow down the priorities of how that particular request compared to some others that were coming forward for a variety of other initiatives or services that administration is looking at implementing or enhancing.
Yeah, I appreciate that background, and that makes sense to me. And maybe I'm jumping a little too far ahead because we haven't approved this. I know you're just kind of checking in, but I think what I'd encourage administration and challenge administration really would be, if council stands up and puts our name behind this plan, be as aggressive as you need to be in putting those asks in front of us at budget time. I've often found that I haven't seen those asks, and I don't know if that's just conservative nature from FCSS generally, but I haven't seen some of those more aspirational asks in those budgeting process to put that in front of us. So again, probably a little early on that, but if we're going to sign off on this down the road, challenge us to actually fund it and figure out ways to do that. So I just share that piece on the budgeting side. The last thing for me though is, and I promise I'll be quick here, Chair, is on that action number 4 there around the proactive outreach to senior levels of government. And I know this is a tough one, but there's a lot of, aspirational comments in here, like a lot of work with this group, work with that group. And I know, and so I'm wondering if we could be a bit more specific in terms of what can we actually do. And, it just seems, yes, we need to work with the MRB and the growth plan. Yes, talk to regional stakeholders and all that sort of stuff. But as mentioned right off the top, this doesn't happen on the back of Beaumont alone. And so is there a way that we could put a more specific strategy on, we'll put together a task force and we'll go and actually lobby, we'll go and meet with the minister and we'll put that process in place. And maybe you're thinking about that and it was just broadly in here, but we've been trying to work with the province and the feds for too long, and so we're not seeing much action with working with folks. So that was my only piece in there. Is all the rest of them, I saw a lot of tangible things. We're going to do X, Y, and Z, and I understand it's challenging, but I'd just like to see, maybe going forward as part of your stakeholder outreach or as before it comes back again, and see if we can actually put some specific targets in here, like, okay, let's sit down with the right folks at the province, let's sit down with the right folks and really have a strategy to do that. Who's going to do that by way type thing. So I'll leave it there. But again, really appreciate the discussion and all the effort that went into this. This is something that obviously is a crucial part of our city going forward. So thanks for the effort on that.
Thank you. Our next question will come from Committee Member Van Newkirk, followed by the last of the questions from Committee Member Barnhart. Steve, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you. And just piggybacking on a couple of the comments Councillor Malkoff-Swain just made, where I was going to start with is that, when you decide you want to do something, you put resources to it and you go and do it. And, you say, let's do it. And then off you go. One of the things that I have a hard time trying to wrap my head around is, how do you prioritize the need for affordable housing in the community and weigh that against all the other community needs? I don't know the best way to measure and think about that. So, and that speaks and comes down to budgeting. That comes down to FCSS asking for more when you need more at budget time, similar to what Councillor Malkoff-Swain said, and then fighting for those dollars, right? But that only happens within Beaumont, and that's the part that we can control. But we, as it's been said, we can only do so much. But if we decide we're going to do something, then, let's make it a priority and make it happen. That's, that's how schools are built. That's how rec spaces are built. That's how other municipal items are realized. So, I don't think that, and this might be a very naive statement, and tell me if it is, somebody, but I don't think we can sit around and wait for tax dollars to appear to do this anymore. I really do think that there needs to be some more creative funding mechanisms explored, partnerships, pension funds, all of these things. You see many industries that are going outside traditional lenders and finding successes these days. You don't have to read very far in the newspaper to find a partnership for this and a partnership for that anymore. So I don't think on the affordable housing file that we can sit back and wait for tax dollars to appear anymore. So, those would be my comments. And, that ties back into my original question around funding and how are we going to do that? And, it also comes into the call to action, right? Because, do we need we will investigate or look into alternative funding arrangements for, for this strategy? Do we need that in the strategic implementation goals? I don't know. I would think we should, to at least have the conversation. So anyways, I'm not here to craft the document. Those are some thoughts that I have, and hopefully some of the funding conversations or pieces that have been brought up here tonight can be incorporated a bit more. So thank you.
Thank you. Committeemember Barnhart, you are our last person with questions for our presenters. Please go ahead, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair Daniluk. And I wonder, based on what I heard just now from Councillor Van Nieuwkerk and from Councillor Monkoff-Swain, if there would be an opportunity to be more specific in our action plans and consider an innovative pilot project where perhaps the City of Beaumont could bring together a developer, a builder, a commercial owner, you name it, and model the way towards innovative funding. Because I think you're bang on, Councillor Van Nieuwkerk, that we can't depend on taxpayers because it's only the one taxpayer. We're paying it in many different ways, but we're still paying. And while I know we will have to always have tax-supported support for families that are low income and individuals that are low income, I do think that there's a way that the business community wants to be involved in philanthropic as well as innovative business pursuits. The one thing that comes to mind right now that would be perhaps nothing's easy, but might stimulate some thought is we're looking at economic development. We're looking at the city being involved in land development. We have some opportunities perhaps to build onto our commercial or light industrial, some form of housing, some form of residential occupancy, single bedrooms potentially, which is really the big need. And maybe we can put together a number of partners who can fund something like that. And to Councillor Hendrick's point that it is about how much is it going to cost and who's going to pay the rent and how much is the rent going to be. But if you bring all those partners together with an idea, it often generates more ideas like that. And there's a ton of those examples. I think Ms. Williston and Ms. Sangster, they participated in the recent municipal conversation, and the mayor did as well. There are so many unique ways to do it. They're one-offs, but those one-offs tend to generate other opportunities. So yeah, it's hard, but I think it's also exciting to think that we have land and buildings and need all coming together, that perhaps Beaumont could be one of those pilot project sites. And maybe that's an initiative we put into our action plan to explore the opportunities for a pilot project. Just thinking, but just putting together what everybody has said, to me, I think there's an opportunity to move this forward aggressively. I really do like that, that approach. Thank you for that, councillors.
Thank you, Committeemember Barnhart. Seeing other requests to speak, part of the advantage of being the chairman, you just ask the questions at the very end, but sometimes your questions are already answered before you have a chance to speak. So thank you, committee members, for asking such great questions and having some good observations. I'll simply say, I echo the same comments. Great report, huge amount of information, fascinating to read. I do think transit on demand in Beaumont borders will help our people, our seniors get around, our citizens get around, as well as it'll back up affordable housing. And I love Steve's suggestion of the creative financing idea. That has merit in my mind. So I do appreciate that. So with that, I have drafted a motion for the committee to consider, and the motion is on your screen now. Is there a committee member willing to make the motion on your screen in front of me now? Committee Member Barnhart, if you wouldn't mind reading the actual motion, please.
Sure. Thank you very much, Chair Daniluk, that the Committee of the Whole receive the Affordable Housing Strategy Report as information.
Thank you. Any questions on the motion from the committee members before I call for the vote? Seeing none, I'll ask you to vote, please, committee members. And that carries unanimously. Ladies, thank you for presentation, great information, and we do thank you for your participation this evening. Thank you very much. Our next presentation, will be a curbside collection business scope presentation presented by Ms. Jennifer Bozo-Hudak, our Director of Operations. Ms. Hudak, you have the floor, please, for your presentation. Thank you.
Awesome. Can everyone see the screen here? I've just got to change some things around. Bear with me.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. In front of you, good evening, Chair and Committee of the Whole members. In front of you, we have a quick timeline or snapshot of why we were here today discussing curbside waste. During the 2021 budget workshop, Council had posed a question to administration in regards to when it would be financially viable to move to an in-house service delivery model. That prompted administration to retain a consultant to provide information on various models related to curbside collection. Some of those options are noted in the attached Tetra Tech report for information. Today, administration is presenting to the Committee of the Whole with the analysis completed. It does not make sense financially to move to an in-house model today, nor have there been significant service level changes to prompt this change. Let's begin with a quick recap of solid waste services for Beaumont. Beaumont's curbside waste collection has 3 streams: gray cart, which is our garbage, green cart, which is our organics, our blue bag, which is our recycling. In addition, the city hosts local events and provides other venues for our residents related to waste, such as our hazardous roundup event, large item curbside pickup, spring and fall cleanup, access to the Leduc Eco Station, an additional 1,000 kgs of self-haul of household waste to the Leduc landfill. All of the above at the $24.29 monthly service charge per household for 2021. Cost reduction is typically one of the central arguments behind public-private partnerships and outsourcing. However, there are trade-offs with service quality and accountability related to outsourcing, which are risks managed by administration. In Q3 2020, administration had proactively transitioned to a mixed service delivery model from 100% vendor to some in-house services. The 2 services that the city operations adopted were the delivery of new carts to residents and repairs and assembly of these carts. We also moved from a 4-day to a 5-day pickup schedule. This slide illustrates some of the issues from residents over the past 16 months. As you are aware, our Service Beaumont app is fully integrated into our workflow management system. That is, information received from residents as service requests, whether they're electronic or we put them in from a phone call, are investigated, recorded, and potentially translated into a work order for completion by administration, or in this case, a corrective action notice issued to our vendor. This table here lists some of the differences between the former contract and current mixed services. I'll come back to that if the Committee of the Whole would like to look at those things. In addition, administration during that 2020 change shored up our vendor management communication and compliance by working through timelines and issue resolution techniques in real time, building a better model to respond to errors identified by residents. Receiving standardized reports and photos from our vendor when issues are detected at time of pickup, These are complete with date and time stamps. An example, if carts are not out at the designated pickup time, or as this photo depicts, overflowing garbage that cannot be picked up. To recap, at this time, the analysis moving to an in-house service delivery is not financially positive, nor have there been significant service delivery issues with the current contracted service to prompt such a change. So the next steps are timeline. Administration would like to continue to manage the solid waste through a mixed contracted service delivery model. Currently, we have a 1-year extension with our curbside vendor, which ends August 2022. We will continue to manage vendor performance through the term of the contract, maintaining service levels for Beaumont residents. In Q1 2022, an RFP will be publicly posted for curbside waste collection contracted services. And at that time, if the market price for contracted services escalates and becomes cost prohibitive, administration will bring back that to council for a decision. At this time, I would stop sharing my screen and leave this with the committee to discuss.
Thank you, Ms. Bozo-Hudak, for your presentation this evening. Are there any committee members willing to ask questions of our presenter on this topic of curbside collection at the present time? Any questions? Okay. Oh, Councillor Stout, Committee Member Stout, pardon me. Martin, you have the floor, followed by Committee Member Van Newkirk, followed by Committee Member Steward. Martin, you have the floor.
Thanks, Bill. Yeah, just a quick question I wanted to ask about the report from Tetra Tech that was included in the agenda package. One of the commonest questions I get asked, and I get asked this quite a lot about garbage collection, is when can we have a weekly garbage collection back, and instead of a bi-weekly one? And I generally respond by saying, well, this would add a lot to the cost of that. Going to a weekly service instead of the existing bi-weekly service would add significantly to costs, which would then be passed back to the user. And the chart that you included in the agenda package on page, 179 of 218? Oh, it starts on 178, in fact. Oh no, it's all on 179, I beg your pardon. Chart included there seems to confirm that in the City of Leduc and City of Fort Saskatchewan have similar bi-weekly collections and similar charges, and then we compare it with Grand Prairie and Lacombe, and they have weekly charges and their cost of service is significantly higher. So that's all good. But then I noticed that there's a couple, is it Cochrane and Okotoks, that both have weekly collections, and their charges are very comparable with ours. So all I was wondering was, is there any reason for that? Are they doing something different to us, or do they have naturally lower costs for a weekly collection, or is I suppose they're both around the Calgary area, whereas all the other ones I've looked at are not. Is that a factor maybe? I just wondered if you could offer any insight at all into that.
There's two questions. I had asked that as well, and it goes to bulk purchasing. The number of households in Cochrane are more than ours. And as well, the metropolitan area in Calgary, they have a system that they're working on that they actually collaborate amongst the different municipalities that are looking at different kind of vendor purchasing. So they've done that kind of procurement process. But as far as, and I want to go back to what you asked about why we're not going weekly, we had done an analysis before about the amount of garbage that was produced. And I think it was actually during COVID that we didn't increase our amount of garbage for going to the landfill, and it wasn't the cost to add that wasn't it was too significant. It's more of a convenience. But the other thing, we want to educate more residents to, the diversion rates and try to do more composting, recycling. So it's a combination of. It's a long answer, but it's to answer your question. we can go back out and get another dollar amount. We can have that discussion, back to council, and we can look at the weekly charge, the difference again. But it's something that hasn't been really a high need. It's a convenience. So if we want to go to a convenience, we can look at that for you.
Understand that. Yeah, thank you. And that wasn't really what I was asking, in the sense that I understand why we go bi-weekly and not weekly, and that in any event, one could users who want a weekly collection could instead get a second cart and fill 2 carts in 2 weeks, which would have much the same effect at an increased charge, of course. And that increased charge will be comparable with what the guys are providing the weekly service are the municipalities that do that charging. But no, really all I wanted to understand was how it is that the Okotoks and Cochrane, is it on the examples, were able to provide this at lower cost. Did you say that they had a bulk deal in Calgary?
We have different purchasing methods down there, but the other thing is I can reach out and get back to you on that for more specifics. They might not be offering the same kind of services that we do for the other events as well.
Right, it might not be a comparable service. I guess the follow-up question then becomes, if there is a different arrangement in Calgary, can we look at doing something similar here and thus reducing our costs?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. I will yield the floor, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Committee Member Stout. Our next question will come from Committee Member Van Nieuwkerk, followed by Committee Member Steward. Steve, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Stout, for breaking the ice on that pickup timing piece of the conversation. I was going to put forward, similar to what Ms. Bozo-Hudak put forward, is that we learned during COVID that the frequency of pickup doesn't affect the actual volume of waste generated in the municipality. So, the municipality generates what it generates, no matter how often we pick it up, and quite succinctly, that, as was stated, comes down to the convenience factor. I do know and appreciate that from time to time, a household may generate more waste around certain periods, but then, you figure out how to deal with that. So anyways, that's just a comment. Around the actual report itself, there was, I just wanted to say thank you for the report, because it quantifies the feeling that I had. I felt that, the approach that we were taking was, the fiscally responsible route. And it didn't happen overnight. It's a mixed service now, whereas, and we didn't just get there. It's taken some time to get to this mixed service. And I think the mixed service piece of it is what is helping the efficiencies here. So thank you for that. It seems to be a common thought that you can do garbage cheaper on your own. And this report shows us that that isn't the case. So, that's my concluding statement. And thank you for the math behind that feeling. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Our next question will come from Committee Member Steward. John, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Actually, I'm going to continue down Councillor Van Nieuwkerk's path, because he sort of summed up my thought there. It was a great report. It sort of, it confirmed what I sort of suspected. If we brought it in house, I believe, if I remember correctly, our average monthly cost would be $26. We're currently paying $24, so those are pretty comparable, pretty close. The downside being, and this is the part that got me, is for having pretty much the same monthly cost, we would have to put out millions of dollars in capital in terms of trucks and buildings, and I don't know if that was amortized in there or it was in addition to the $26 a month per person or per household. So when we first started down this path, we were trying to fix a customer service issue with poor service from our current the vendor at the time, and so that seems to have settled and been fixed and going forward. So I'm quite happy with the status quo and moving forward. Having said that, though, if we're going to look at service delivery changes, the one common complaint that I do get is why do I have to go to the Echo Station in Leduc or the dump or the Echo Station in Edmonton? So perhaps if we wanted to do some type of service enhancement delivery, we could look at putting an Echo Station here in Beaumont somewhere. But those are my 2 comments. Thank you.
Thank you. I echo Mayor Stewart's comments on the capital outlay to actually take the service in-house. I'm not sure that there's a justification based on the information we have in this report here. So thank you very much for that information. Is there any more questions before I ask administration to put forward a motion on the chat line to accept that this report is information? Seeing no further questions, I'll ask that the motion be placed on the screen. Is there a committee member willing to make the motion or look at making a second motion of their own? I see committee member Stout's hand is up. Committee member Stout, you wish to make that motion?
Mr. Chair, yes, I'd be happy to make that motion. The committee of the whole receives the curbside collection business scope presentation as information.
Thank you very much. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call for the question. And that is carried unanimously. Thank you, committee members. Thank you, Ms. Bozo-Hudak, for your presentation. Very informative. Thank you very much. Committee members, we've been at it for just about an hour and 10 minutes. We're happy with our presentations. I will call a 5-minute environmental recess. To the general public or the committee of the whole after our 5-minute short break on to our next topic of discussion, which is, give me 1 second to bring it up here, number 3C, Council Policy C48, Taxation Policy. Our presenter will be Mr. Cruz de Blanco, Director of Finance. Mr. de Blanco, if you're joining us, you have the floor, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good evening to the committee. In the fall and earlier this year, administration has brought forth a number of foundational financial policies. Tonight, we'll be presenting 2 more policies, the first being a taxation policy. So before the committee is a report recommending the draft taxation policy, which is included as attachment 1. The taxation policy provides objectives and guidelines for how the city of Beaumont will administer taxation. The city provides various services and infrastructure that produce broad benefits to the community and recognizes that the cost of these services needs to be distributed amongst the tax base. The policy seeks to provide guidance to equitably distribute these costs, all the while ensuring it supports the strategic priorities as identified by council, as well as being compliant with the Municipal Government Act. In the objective sections, this guides the city on how they will administer taxation. First being distributive fairness and equity. This guides admin to distribute the cost of these services based on the value of assessed property. This approach ensures taxes are distributed fairly and equitably throughout the community and promotes transparency, predictability, and stability for both the city and taxpayers. The second objective is revenue neutrality, which means the city's tax revenues shall not increase or decrease due to increases or decreases in the housing market. This approach protects both the city and taxpayers from large shifts in taxation resulting from market value fluctuations. Next objective, appropriate utilization of growth revenue, guides administration to make recommendations for tax revenue generated from growth that align with growth-related expenditures, whether they be new growth-related initiatives or responses to existing growth-related pressures. The next section, guidelines. The policy provides guidelines for administration to achieve stated objectives specifically on how the tax levy requirement, municipal tax rates, and individual tax levies are to be calculated, as well as the process for estimating and validating revenue from new assessment or real growth. One key guideline that I'll draw the committee's attention to is the general municipal tax ratio. So this was discussed during both budget deliberations in the fall and during the approval of the 2021 tax rate bylaw. The policy outlines what this ratio should be, how to evaluate the ratio's appropriateness, and approach for adjusting the ratio. The city's current ratio for tax rates is approximately 1.4 to 1. This means the city's property tax rate for non-residential properties is calculated approximately 40% higher than the residential property rate. The Municipal Government Act allows municipalities to set this tax ratio as high as 5 to 1. Other sections within the policy and guidelines identify other tax measures available under the Municipal Government Act. And the final sections 5 and 6, discuss how this policy will be applied and managed within the organization. This policy does align with the municipal strategic plan, specifically Pillar 3 regarding fiscal responsibility. There are no budget or financial implications associated with the approval of this policy. At this time, this concludes the report. And at this time, I'll turn it over to the committee for discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. DeBlanco, for the presentation. I appreciate that. Are any committee members willing or looking to ask questions of Mr. DeBlanco on this particular topic? First, we'll have Committee Member Hendricks, followed by Committee Member Steward. Perry, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To Mr. DeBlanco, just to give some comfort to those who've been annexed into the city of Beaumont, how is their tax position in relation to this document?
So thanks for the question. So the annex properties from the County of Leduc, they're subject to a lesser of calculation by the lesser of the county's rates or the city's rates, depending on what their assessment classification is. That gets calculated as part of the annual property tax rate bylaw, and it remains in effect until there's either, once again, I don't have the items that change that process in front of me, but includes sale of the land or change of use would be when those rates would defer to the city amounts.
Right, and those are formalized in other documents.
That is correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. If you're done, thank you very much. Our next question will come from Committee Member Stewart, followed by Committee Member Stout, followed by Committee Member Barnhart. John, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Question surrounding the formula. Is there a better blue sky in here? Does the MGA permit a better way to calculate tax fairness taxes? I mean, I know we use assessed value and multiply by the tax rate and it's fair. My biggest concern comes around assessed value because the same thing happens year over year over year. Everybody gets their property reassessed. Your value goes up, goes down, your taxes go up, go down. This year, it was even a little bit more pronounced because we promised a 0% tax increase, and effectively we did that. But depending upon how your property got assessed, your taxes stayed the same, went up, still went up, still went up, or sorry, still went up, still went down, or stayed the same. Do we have to assess property every year? Is there a way we can stabilize that? Can we do things a little differently to make it a little less fluctuating? I guess is my question.
So the answer to the question is the MGA is pretty prescriptive on how we need to implement assessment and taxation. In terms of being stable in terms of fluctuation, that's addressed in Objective 2, which is revenue neutrality. And it does say that, good point, assessed values do go up, they do go down. But when we set the revenue requirement for the city this year, as an example, 0%, that means the average ratepayers levy stayed at 0%, stayed the same. So individual instances of assessment fluctuating up are going to be heard more vocally than, let's say, instances where assessments go down. But overall, the big pie, which is the city of Beaumont's ratio and assessment base, in 2020, the growth, not growth, but inflation actually went down, which means the tax rate goes up. But the fact is the revenue set as part of the operational budget remained at 0%. In terms of ability to use a different formula, that would actually open the city and ratepayers up to more risk in terms of fluctuation.
Yeah, we don't want to do that. I was just like, maybe we assess every 2 years versus every 1 year or something. I don't know, but we get the same complaints every year. Second question.
Yes, please.
Second question is based on a tax split. Currently, it's 1.4 to 1, which is actually fairly narrow compared to some of our comparative municipalities. What would happen if we dropped it to say 1.2 to 1? How does that shift the tax burden?
So if in that instance where dropping the ratio from 1.2 to 1, that would shift more of the tax burden to the residential taxpayer and lower the tax burden of the non-residential taxpayer or commercial.
Okay. So effectively,
so all things being equal, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I say so effectively, like this year if we had a 0, but if we shifted that ratio to 1.2, all of our residents would get a small bump and our businesses would get a small decrease. That's sort of how that would shuffle.
Mhm.
Yes, that is completely accurate.
Thank you very much for clarifying that. In this year, I'm pretty status quo. But going forward, that might be a grander discussion to have in future years.
Thank you. Our next question is coming from Council Member Stout, please. You have the floor, Martin.
Thank you, Bill. I'm supportive of this policy and the objectives and principles that it puts forth. So I'm likely to vote in favour of this. A tip in my hand there. But I have a question, which is this. I don't see
Sorry, Martin, you're cutting out badly on your
then I actually need a policy. Why do we need?
Martin, sorry, the last 30 seconds you cut in and out considerably. We couldn't make out anything you said except bits and pieces. So can you repeat your second comment there, please?
Yeah, you hearing me now? Okay.
Yes, better. Thanks.
Sorry, I keep getting a little message that my internet connection is unstable. I'm sorry. I'll start again. Yeah, supportive of this. Question is, does this this doesn't represent a great change from what we already do, from the practice that we already apply. So why do we need a policy to to tell us that to formalize what we're already doing, or am I missing something, or is there a significant change here that I've not noticed?
Yes, you're correct in that the content in the policy does reflect what is already in place, but I think I'll use your words that it does just formalize the process of what we already do, so that year to year it adds transparency for both administration, council, and the ratepayers, is that this is the city's policy around taxation.
Okay, and consequently, if a subsequent council changed its mind and wanted to do something different, then they'd need to adjust the policy as well, presumably.
Yes, that would be correct.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. Just wanted to clarify.
You're on mute.
You have the floor, please. Go ahead, Kathy.
Thank you, Chair Dunlap. And similar question, content-wise, to the mayor, asking about the 1.4 to 1 ratio. Mr. Dowler or Mr. DeBlanco, I don't recall that particular ratio coming forward to council for approval or discussion on an annual basis. So I might be forgetting it, or that's possible, but is it something that councillors have to raise for it to come forward, or is it now, because we have this policy, is there going to be more of a recognition that every budget we need to identify and approve that particular ratio?
I'll take a shot at answering that, and if Mr. Dowler has any additional thoughts, I'll let him go. So in terms of it coming to council, I can't speak to years prior than potentially the 2021 budget having it be brought up, but it would have been considered as part of each year's budget and tax ratio. Once again, I'm not. If I look back, it's been the same for approximately 10 years. And if I find some evidence, I can see that it approximates what the school requisition ratio is. It's in that ballpark, that 1.4. I think a big part of Councillor Stout's question and your question is putting it in this policy allows it to be more front and center for council and admin and ratepayers to discuss it more openly.
Yeah, I do think it's more transparent this way. And I can recall someone, wasn't myself, but it was some other councillor asking the question and being told basically that it's the same tax rate, but the ratio is different than the rate. And so I think the question has been evaded somewhat. So I think this is good that it is transparent and councillors in the future can look at it.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, if I could just add to the question around council approving it on an annual basis, specifically, and I guess that wouldn't necessarily be the case or wouldn't be required. It could be a topic of conversation, and quite frankly, I would hope it would be part of the conversation we would have with council going forward, because it does become a mechanism to achieve other results possibly. And I think that's where the mayor was going with, shifting the ratio 1.2 to 1. It then creates more incentive for your non-residential ratepayers. And depending on what council is interested in at that particular time, you can use the ratio to achieve other objectives. So to answer the question, I wouldn't necessarily see council having to approve it at a budget. That's not what this is really about. But by default, the policy tells administration and any future council that without any conversation, and what we would be bringing forward as part of a budget is that 1.4 to 1 ratio.
Thank you for that clarification, Mr. Dowling.
Thank you to all committee members with their questions and administration for their answers. I see no further questions from committee members on taxation policy C48. If I'll have a motion put in front of you on the screen to have the committee of the whole refer council policy C48 to council for approval. Is there a member of the committee willing to make that motion or a different motion of their own? Committee member Stout, would you please repeat the motion or make your own motion, please?
Certainly, Mr. Chair. I'll make that motion. I'll move that the committee of the whole refer council policy C48 to council for approval.
Thank you very much. Any questions on the motion from committee members? Seeing none, I'll call for the question. I'll please vote accordingly. And that passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Our next presentation will revolve around council policy C14, purchasing revision. And our speaker will again be Mr. Carissa Blanco, Director of Finance. Mr. Blanco, you have the floor, please.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair. Next, administration has brought forward a report recommending the draft purchasing policy, which is also included as attachment 1. This policy has been developed to define standards for the procurement of goods, services, and construction contracts for the city and ensure compliance with relevant trade agreements. City's purchasing policy was adopted in 2013. As this policy is 8 years old, administration conducted a review with the intent of bringing the policy up to date. The purpose of the purchasing policy is to establish a framework of objectives and guidelines for procurement activities in the city. With the draft policy, administration intends to ensure procurement activities are done so in a manner to obtain overall best value for the city, create positive economic, social, and environmental impacts while maintaining open, fair, and transparent procurement processes. Further, administration intends to ensure the city's procurement activities support the strategic priorities identified by council while complying with the Municipal Government Act and all other statutes and regulations governing purchasing and procurement. Once again, some objectives of the purchasing policy. A key section, the section provides additional guidance to administration regarding procurement priorities. The first priority would be to utilize the city's procurement activities to obtain the best value available. Likely the most important objective, this ensures that it's clear to administration that there is a fiscal responsibility for the efficient use of tax dollars. Second objective, ensuring open and fair competition for the city's business. This objective guides administration to ensure that procurement activities are performed through a fair, open, transparent, and competitive process that balances the best interests of the city, all while treating vendors fairly and equitably. The next objective addresses obtaining sustainable value to the city, guiding administration to consider, evaluate, and analyze economic, social, and environmental aspects while performing purchasing activities. Finally, compliance. Obviously, the city shall remain compliant with all relevant legislation, including but not limited to the Municipal Government Act, relevant trade agreements, as well as city bylaws, policies, and procedures. Guidelines section, the policy provides guidelines for administrations to achieve its stated objectives. The sections include additional information on obtaining best value, procurement ethics, conflicts of interest, confidentiality, social value, local vendors, environmental sustainability, as well as risk mitigation. Last section 6 and 7 discuss how the policy will be applied and managed within the organization. Specifically, it guides administration on how the CAO may delegate purchasing authority to the directors, managers, and supervisors responsible for city departments, service areas, and cost centers, respectively, within the limits approved in the municipal operating, utility operating, and capital budgets. Finally, this policy does align with the municipal strategic plan, specifically Pillar 3 regarding fiscal responsibility. There are no budget or financial impacts associated with the approval of this policy. Thank you. This concludes the report. At this time, I will turn it over to the committee for discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. DeBlanco. I appreciate that. Is there any committee members wishing to ask questions, Mr. DeBlanco, on Council Policy C14 purchasing? I see Committee Member Hendricks, followed by Committee Member Van Newkirk, followed by Committee Member Monkoff-Swain, and then Committee Member Stout. So, Mr. Perry, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and certainly there's two things that mankind have chased from the beginning of time. One is to be fair in purchasing, and the other one is perpetual motion. These are all objectives that are highly sought, but they're all subjective, and you can only put so much into paper, and you can only leave it to others to make the call. My question, though, would be whether or not there's any kind of matrix scoring document that goes with this when doing a procurement review.
Yes, thank you for your question. So in terms of matrices and scoring, that would be in the processes and procedures that come out of the procurement service area. It'll be highly independent to the type of procurement activity that's being undertaken in the service or goods or construction contracts that's being tendered. But yes, there will be outlining the policies within the best value objective.
Right. So in the past, and I've seen them where we've had them in the past, and the way the documents have read in the past, the points scored can keep a very, very good quality, highly valued procurement person, vendor, whatever, from getting in, because they may not have physicality in terms of size, number of employees, all that stuff, because there's sometimes where you've got like a vendor that has 200 employees. Well, click, that goes into the box and you get 20 points. Well, nobody's going to catch up to that, other than that one vendor. So it basically knocks the box out for everybody else. So I'm just saying, I've seen it in the past. I've made cases in the past saying, hey, how do you be fair at that level? I don't have an answer for that, but if it's based on bench strength, and what vendors can bring versus what other vendors can do, there's some small players out there that would never have the bench strength that, again, the big nationals or globals or whatever can pull together. So trying to be fair is very important, but how you get there, I don't know. So that'd be my comments.
Thank you very much. Our next question will come from Committee Member Van Newkirk. Steve, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you. Just a question on sections in the document, I guess, for administration, Mr. DeBlanco. I don't recall in the past if policies such as this have included a roles section. So in number 3, we have definitions. And then down at the bottom, we have authority/responsibility to implement. There are policies out there that have a clear roles and responsibility section built into them. And I wonder if at minimum a roles section might need to be included in this policy. And here's why I say that. This past week on the very vibrant Beaumont social media front, it was made very apparent that portions of the residents out there that are commenting and watching on how things are done in the municipality are misunderstanding and misinterpreting the purchasing process, and most specifically, the items described in this purchasing policy. So, I guess if we were to put in a role of council, a role of the city, and a role of the CAO, what might that look like? I don't know. I asked that just for consideration, and I'd like you to comment on that in a second. And then I'd also like administration to confirm that council doesn't actually have a role in purchasing with respect to the purchasing policy, because council doesn't, and that seems to be misunderstood, and it was definitely misrepresented in this past week. Could you make some comments on the potential for adding a roles section in there and confirm the role of council with respect to purchasing? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. In terms of the roles and responsibilities, the intent within the sections of the document would be that Section 7 would cover off that roles and responsibilities, being that the chief administrative officer is ultimately responsible and accountable for control, management, administration of the city's purchasing activities. In terms of council's role on purchasing and procurement, the role would be mostly to approve the budget, right, which then guides what the limits are in terms of procurement for the CAO and whoever the authority is delegated to. So that delegation of authority would be documented in an internal procurement process, which would likely then get circulated throughout the administration and potentially the public. But yes, in terms of council's role, it would be the approval of the budget and then the delegation of purchasing authority to the CAO.
Yeah, through the CAO, the policy that states, what the CAO's role is, or I don't know if it was a policy, but there's a document there that we've went through that, delegates those authorities to the CAO. So is there a way, or should there, or could there be a way to more definitively state in this document what you put forward around council's role is to approve the budget, and the CAO's role is to do it within the confines of the budget? Would it be possible to make that more clear in this policy by adding a sentence or two?
Yes, that could absolutely get added to that Section 7. A little bit of it'd probably go as preamble before the first paragraph there on what council's role is, delegates the authority to the CAO.
Yeah, thank you. I think that clarity would be deserving in this document. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next question will come from Committee Member Monkoff-Swain. Sam, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. So Curtis, I'll come at this from an Indigenous reconciliation perspective. I see in here, when we're talking about our objectives, we talk about overall best value, open fair competition, sustainability. When we get down into it, we look at things like, local vendors and may offer preferential treatment, but I'll refer you to the Truth and Reconciliation call to action number 92, where it really calls on corporations, and I consider municipality and corporation on this front to really do more to encourage and implement policies around Indigenous businesses and providing opportunities for them that haven't been there. So my first question, and maybe a little unfair to put you on the spot, but did we look at that at all when we were developing this policy?
Thank you for your question. So that particular item would be encompassed within the guideline under social value considerations. So within that section, we talk about social value considerations for existing purchasing opportunities, provided such social value considerations are consistent with the city's obligations under the applicable trade agreements. And once again, address social economic issues that are descriptive in social impact outcomes related to employment, training, skills development, and social value supply chain, as well as community development. albeit that it doesn't state specifically Indigenous relations, but that item would get encompassed within that section.
Yeah, I read that part, and to me it sounded like a nice broad statement. I guess, I've seen a lot of the leading corporations, implement specific sections within their policy around Indigenous inclusion. When you're receiving bids and weighting them and all that sort of stuff, seeing if there is an Indigenous component to those bids that could potentially be part of the process. So I recognize there is a need to balance the open and fairness piece, but I would encourage administration to think about that, certainly on how we could ensure or encourage and maximize Indigenous business spend within the city itself. I think our procurement policy is one of those key things that we should be looking at. So I don't have any specific suggestions, but just for consideration for administration to go back and take a look at that call to action number 92 there and see if there is if we could put a bit more specific language around that more than the broader piece. Now, obviously that's just my perspective, and then there's 6 other folks in here who may weigh in on that, but I'd like to see more under that social value considerations, a bit more attention put to the Indigenous reconciliation part of that. So I'll leave it there, but that's what I'd like to see a bit more weight around. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next committee question will come from Committee Member Stout, followed by Committee Member Barnhart. Martin, you have the floor.
Thank you, Bill. Quick question for Mr. DeBlanco, I think. Regarding the 2 trade agreements that are referred to in here, I'm just trying to pull up sorry, excuse me a moment. I just lost my notes. Doesn't it always happen when you're speaking? Okay, sorry. The 2 trade agreements. Agreement on Internal Trade, AIT, and the New West Partnership Trade Agreement, NWPTA, and that the city shall ensure that all procurements of goods, services, and construction contracts are in compliance with both of those. Possibly other people here are better informed than I am, but I had to Google both of those and try and figure out what they were and between whom. I'm wondering if it would be possible, in the interest of clarity, to include a link or a 2-sentence crib or whatever might be considered necessary to just make those, what those are and what they do, explicit and clear.
Yeah, within the policy, thank you for your question. Within the policy, there's a little more broad statements. We do identify those particular ones as well as the MGA. There's broad statements saying subsequent federal or provincial legislation, regulations or agreements. So any new trade agreements that would come forth would still apply within this policy. But yes, we can add a sentence or 2 on specifically what those 2 agreements, a little summary on each.
Yeah, I think that would be worthwhile. I noticed the AIT one, for instance, was signed back in 1995. I don't know how, between First Ministers, I don't know how many people would be up to speed on that now. So it might be just in the interest of adding clarity. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Our next question will come from Committee Member Barnhart. Kathy, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair Donna, and thank you, Mr. DeBlanco, for the report. I focused on 2 areas. One was conflict of interest and the other one was local vendors. And this must have been the week that a lot of work has been happening and people have been interested over the last, certainly in the spring, because I too have been getting some interesting requests for information. And it isn't our role and we don't have the information, so it's very difficult to answer those questions. When I look at the way this policy is written, the use of the word shall and will is in certain places which interest me. I'll talk about them specifically. And then the word may. So specifically under conflict of interest, there is it's not a shall or a will, but city employees are to exercise caution when dealing with vendors or potential vendors when there's a possibility of a conflict of interest. It doesn't rule it out. In other words, there could be a conflict of interest as long as they are taking precautions to avoid that. And I can understand that. But then it goes on to say that city employees will not use their public role to influence. So that's very specific. That uses the word will not. So just in contrast there's a caution, which doesn't say you can't do it. And then there's definitely city employees cannot, and that's under the purview of the city manager. Then I looked at the local vendors as well, because it's another issue, but again, it's about the language. It says the city may provide preferential treatment. So again, I don't even know why that's there if it's not part of the policy. It's just putting words there that are then not necessarily given very many points if you look at the way the things are scored. So I kind of come to the conclusion that it all rests with the city manager. And if the CAO is okay with the process and who he's delegated it to, because at council, we have no information. And the public, I don't think they have any information unless they themselves question whether they did or didn't get this and you give them information. So it just brought home for me that it's not about whether it's just or unjust. It's just that it must appear to be just. And right now, it doesn't look that way. It looks like it's very much dependent on who's making the decision, not on any clear criteria. And that I don't mean to be overly critical, but we can't explain it because it's very difficult to explain. It's very much seems like, from our perspective, without information, a case-by-case decision. And I don't know what you can do about that except to perhaps communicate what the criteria are after a decision is made, but I know how difficult this is. And it just seems to me that we're in kind of a no-win situation if we don't have clear criteria, and if we make it too tight, then we can't take the best, the person or the company that we want to take based on their past performance. So I don't have an easy answer, but I just want to say, I think the reason why we get so many questions is it's not very clear. I don't know if you can make it any clearer to me. It seems to me that it comes down to a decision that's made by the person in the role to make that decision, but defending it is really difficult from any other perspective but that person.
You done, Kathy? Sort of response?
I guess I'm done. It's probably more of a comment than it is a question, but if Mr. DeBlanco or Mr. Galler can give me some comfort there, but people are asking, why didn't we get this? And we certainly can't tell them. We don't even know. Can they get the information from anyone within the administration as to how many points they scored? Is that shared with the vendors? And maybe that's the best way, is we send them back to someone who can explain it to them.
So I'll maybe try and provide a little bit of context as best as I can, and certainly Mr. DeBlanco can jump in when I'm going off track here. The tender processes are open, and the scoring, everything that's received by the city is opened in public. Typically, what will happen is the two or the more than two, the proponents that submitted bids on a job are welcome to attend the meeting where the tenders are opened. That then, certain information is read at that point in time. It's very basic information. It's basically the name of the proponent and the amount that's submitted as a bid. Administration then takes that information, does the evaluation, and typically, to go back a step, as part of the RFP process, there usually is the criteria, the scoring criteria as part of that package. So vendors know what areas will be scored in terms of making the decision as to who gets awarded the contract. Once the bids are opened, administration takes that information away, does the evaluation, and then makes a decision. Now, the proponents are able to, if they so desire, see the scoring and some of the documentation that's collected around that process. It's entirely open for them to get that information, and it's readily available for them. And so that's, when we talk about an open process, that's kind of what we mean, is the information's there and available for the vendors that are asking or interested in it. In terms of questions being asked by the public in general, if it's not specific vendors asking who or why didn't I get this contract, what I would suggest is, first and foremost, that's why we have an audit process on an annual basis. And the auditors will determine whether or not, based on policy, based on process, where we've gone off track, or if we have gone on track. So there is that check and balance at the end of the day around expenditures going out the door. And so, absolutely, some of the comments that have been raised around council's role, we can look at reflecting that in the policy so that it is a little bit clearer and that everybody understands. But truly, as you say, council's, outside of what Mr. DeBlanco raised around the budget, the other big piece for council to control this process is this policy that's in front of committee tonight. And so, if there's things in here, and we have obviously heard a few items that council is maybe looking for some further clarity around, administration can take that away, add them in, and craft the policy so that it provides council with a higher degree of comfort. I guess that this process is what it should be for council to get some comfort with.
Thank you, Mr. Dowler. If I could just one supplementary, Chair Dowler?
Yes, please.
It's okay. So you're suggesting that what we could perhaps get when this comes back to council might be some options around how we might deal with, in my case, the two that I'm concerned about is conflict of interest and local vendors. In the conflict of interest category, I guess I would want to see in there also, should there be, not just for city employees, but should there also be mention of city council?
Yeah, and I would suggest it's something that we can look at, Councillor Barnard. I would just be a little bit hesitant because, again, it gets you down a bit of a path where council is really not involved, other than from a policy perspective, in the purchasing process. And so by adding council, just even by name into the mix,
Well, maybe I could suggest elected officials.
we can look at some of the
I
wording.
don't know, but I mean, it's the same concept to me, is that I don't think we should use our influence and be in a conflict of interest situation with local work. But I'll leave that with you. And you, as you said, you could bring back some information. And on the local vendors, I wonder if we could increase the amount of credit, if you will, towards the points that are delivered as to whether, if someone is local and we're creating local employment, it seems to me that would be consistent with our economic development initiatives to give them more points for being a local employer rather than leave it wishy-washy, the city may. So any information back on that would help me.
Sure, and I certainly agree with that. The local vendors and the social value considerations kind of overlap in some respects from my perspective. The big thing around the criteria, though, it's going to be dependent on the type of activity that we're tendering. In some cases, you're not necessarily going to be able to bring a local vendor into the equation on some of the tenders that we put out. So that's why the language right now is a little bit gray, but it is something that we can look at. And when we come back to council with the policy, maybe have some different suggestions or a different flavor in that section for council to consider.
You're good. Thank you very much. Next question will come from Committee Member Van Newkirk, and that'll end round one. Then we'll begin round two with Councillor Muncroft-Swain and then Committee Member Hendricks. So Steve, you have the floor, please.
Yeah, I'll make a concluding statement that isn't concluding because I'm not the concluding person, but just looking to administration, how will we ensure that some of this comments are going to be incorporated into the document that comes back to council? Are we going to need to modify, the suggested motion? Because right now it says that the committee recommend policy C14 or committee of the whole recommend to council to approve it type thing, but we're not going to be there. Just some comment from administration, how, I've heard, increase the clarity about roles, some comments in the social section, define the trade agreements better. Now we just had some comments around the conflict of interest, local vendor, social inclusion section. How will we handle that process wise tonight? What would your suggestion be?
For me, I think one way to do it is looking at just slightly tweaking the words in the recommended motion right now. And one off the top of my head is committee recommend to council motion as amended. Now, again, has some vagueness to it, but recognizing that what we're hearing through the conversation with committee tonight, we will endeavor to bring forward the policy as amended based on the conversation that we're hearing tonight. So all the points that have been raised, looking at factoring those pieces into the policy that council would receive potentially still next week. So that's one option, and there may be some others that we can look at in terms of tweaking that motion so that committee is comfortable that what they'll see at council is what they intend to see.
Actually, I'll jump on that point, if you don't mind for a moment, Steve, is that I've been corresponding with Miranda, our legislative coordinator, and you see in front of you now a suggested motion that does take in some of the additional comments from the committee members. So that's one possible motion we could go to. Another possibility is to refer back to the committee of the whole and have it come back as an amended report. So I'd answer your question, Steve. If you have any more questions, Steve, before going on to the next question?
No, just so long as when we're done that you'll consider that. So thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. Thank you. Our next round of questions will come from Committee Member Muncroft-Swain, followed by Committee Member Hendricks. Sam, you have the floor.
Yeah, thanks. And maybe I'll just quickly speak to that last discussion. I think, keeping in tune with our goals of those council meetings where they're more kind of approval discussions, I think given what everyone raised here, I would lean towards bringing it back to committee of the whole, give the administration a chance to dive into it and provide some more feedback. So just throwing that out there. I want to go back to my conversation. I don't think I did it justice enough. I don't think I gave clear enough thought around what I was thinking about and as it relates to that reconciliation piece. And so if we do end up committee of the whole, I'm not going to try to sell it here, but I want administration to look into it and consider it. And that specifically relates to the Indigenous inclusion piece when you're looking at the overall scoring. I agree with Councillor Barnhart. The local piece, I would be curious. Our role is to look at that policy section and not to get into the weeds on every vendor. I get that. But from a policy perspective, I would like to see us, include as part of that assessment, their Indigenous inclusion, whether it be from a hiring or from a contracting perspective. And I recognize, Mr. Dowler, that it's not on every contract, and a lot of leading corporations are looking at model this after a certain threshold, whether it be a dollar value or whatever. That could be a way to potentially implement that. But I think what I'm hoping to do is to go out and tell the marketplace that if you're wanting to work in the city of Beaumont, it's an advantage to have Indigenous partners or Indigenous labour force or local labour force, as Councillor Barnhart mentioned. And I think the way to do that is to put that into the point scoring system. Now, it doesn't. I'm not saying that this should outweigh or get even close to outweighing, safety record, commercial viability, all that sort of stuff. But it should be part of it should be part, in my view, should be part of that policy to project that message out that we're encouraging that local and Indigenous piece. So I just wanted to come back on that point just to provide a bit more clarity. Is really in that scoring system. That's where I'd like to see that piece placed, and then how that process falls out is through administration. I totally understand that. So I just, if we bring in this back, whether it's at the next council meeting or a committee of the whole, I'd like a good understanding, to build on what Councillor Barnhart's point is, and then for us to have a conversation around the potential pros and cons of including, those points additional in that overall evaluation of the bid. So I just wanted to add a bit more to that, because I don't think I did that comment initially enough justice earlier. So thanks for that.
Thank you. Committee Member Hendricks. Perry, you have the floor.
Thank you. And it's, again, the policy document is what it is. But it's the devil is in the details. And multiple councils have kicked this can around, trying to establish some level of fairness in this process. Everything from details such as insurance requirements, where the numbers are just prohibitive for some and not for others. Bench strength, how many employees, how that plays out, bonding requirements, yes or no for certain things. All of these things create sort of a situation whereby, there's going to be an inevitable outcome as to who ends up with the work or who ends up with the vendor opportunity. So, there has to be some kind of a balance in the process. And I've heard lots of complaints over the years over, those who didn't get the work as a result of various things in I call it the matrix document, the scoring document, that just doesn't allow them to be successful no matter what comes out. So, because if they're up against a conglomerate or somebody else that's got a massive bench strength, they just can't overcome that. And then the argument is, well, it's sort of tax dollars, and we're going to go to whoever provides us with the best service for the best outcome with our tax dollars. So it's a tough balance. On the conflict of interest issues, I think we already got the pecuniary interest package that's tied to us with the Municipal Government Act. We also have a code of conduct that we've all sworn an oath to. I think we're nice, neat, and tidy as far as that goes, and hopefully we don't have to add yet more reasons why we got to be careful when we speak within our communities. So, so I think that for me covers all the issues that way. But bring it back to COTW. Be interesting to see some of the examples of how this matrix document plays out. Maybe it just sheds a light on why there's concerns or issues. So thank you.
Thank you, Member Hendricks. All right, committee members, I'm going to suggest we do refer back to the committee of the whole. There's some suggested changes made to the administration's document here. I'm going to read a motion and ask for a committee member to make that motion. And if no one does make the motion, we'll go back to something more standard. The motion will be as follows: that the committee refer policy C14 back to administration to incorporate the suggested changes and return to the amended policy to a future committee of the whole. Is there a committee member? Kathy, is a committee member willing to make that motion? Kathy, that's you? Okay.
Yes, sorry, I jumped the gun there, but yes, I was just trying to say, yes, I would make that motion.
Okay, as moved by committee member Barnhart. Discussion on the motion, please. I see two hands up, starting with committee member Monkoff-Swain. Sam, you have the floor on the motion.
Yes, so I support the motion. I just want to be clear on some of the things that I've talked about tonight. This is new for a lot of people. And so I'm not necessarily asking for administration to incorporate that into the policy. I don't think we need to reword it, but at least bring back that as a broader discussion for the group. So that the motion specifically says, incorporate the suggested changes. I recognize that I'm just one voice. And so I'm not asking you to put that specific language in the policy, but when we come and we have it back at a committee of the whole, to have that discussion, to talk about what that could include. I don't think we're, this policy has been out for, not out, but we haven't updated it for a few years. I don't think we're in a super rush to get it done. I'd rather get it right. So I just want to make sure that that's clear. And then the only thing that also that I see here is I'm not a big fan of motions without dates on them. We've seen that before. So is this something, and I'll look to administration, is this something that we could, potentially bring back in August? Knowing that we don't have the next one, is that too quick a time frame, or there's a whole bunch of things on the agenda I'm not sure about, but I don't want to just leave it in limbo and then, for us not to look at it, because this is an important part that I'm interested in. So I'd like us to consider a date here. And I see that the mayor is very excited, so I'm sure he's going to jump up.
Yeah, all I was going to say was we only have one more committee of the whole left, so that's August. So unless we're calling special meetings, anything that refers back to committee of the whole, it's coming in August. So if administration can make the timeline, that's great. Otherwise, it's special meeting time.
Yeah, certainly August shouldn't be an issue from administration's perspective, so that works.
Okay. Sam, do you want to amend the motion to suggest the August 17th committee of the whole, or leave the motion as it is and expect to come back in August?
I'm okay. I think Mr. Dowell's got the direction that we're here. And if we can't make it for whatever reason and it's just too packed, then then so be it. But I think I've got it there, so I don't need to amend it. I just wanted to make sure we had that clarification. Okay, good. You have the opportunity to make an amendment if you wanted to. Okay, are there any other questions on the motion? None being, I'll read it one more time for clarity, that the committee refer policy C14 back to administration to incorporate the suggested changes and to return the amended policy to a future committee of the whole. I will call for the question on the motion. Sorry, Kathy, is there a question?
It just occurred to me that one of the criticisms that I've been hearing, not about our policies, but about federal and provincial, is that when the general public sees a motion like this and they see a number, C14, they have no idea what that means. Would it be a hard thing to just amend that to put policy C14 procurement policy, so that people know what it is we're talking about, and including ourselves, we can forget ourselves.
It is your motion, so you can make a friendly amendment.
And just if I have the floor, I wonder if Councillor Munkoff-Swain would rather we not say incorporate the suggested changes. To his point about he's not sure what those changes are until he sees them. And we're not sure we're all going to vote for all of those changes. So bring back to the administration to return I don't know how to reword that now. That's the challenge I'm having. I'm okay if he's okay.
Yeah, I just, it's in the spirit of the motion, if I can use those words, and I think I'm getting some head nods from Mr. Dowell here. So I think they're, okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to amend the motion to say as follows, that the committee refer policy C14, purchasing policy, back to administration to incorporate the suggested changes and to return the amended policy to a future committee of the whole. We're okay with that?
So
at that point? Okay, I will not ask any more questions about the motion. I'm going to ask the question on the vote. So I'll call for the question. All those in favor of the motion, please. And that passes unanimously. Thank you, committee members. Much appreciated. Thank you, Mr. DeBlanco, Mr. Dowler, for your assistance. And Miranda, great job in keeping those motions clear, helping our committee make the right decision today. Thank you very much, Miranda. Next on the agenda is number 4, closed session. I'm not aware of anything in closed session this evening. Am I correct, Miranda? I believe so.
You're correct. There are no closed session items this evening, Chair.
Thank you very much. Brings us to point number 5, councillor inquiries. Are there any councillor inquiries this evening to be brought forward to the committee of the whole by any committee members? Councilmember Hendricks, you have the floor.
Thank you, Your Worship, Mr. Chair. To Mr. Dollar, just an update, if you could, on the sound shadow study for the cooling tower at the BSRC.
Thank you for the question. We do have the results of the study. We have proceeded with the recommended solution. The last time I checked in with Mr. Suter, we were just waiting for some of the parts. It's actually a new fan that was ordered for the cooling tower itself. And so not exactly sure when we're receiving the part, but as soon as we get it, it'll be installed. And then hopefully that will make a significant difference to the nearby residents in terms of the sound. So we are almost there, and once we get that installed, we'll be sure to let council know.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further councillor inquiries this evening for administration? Seeing none. Item number 6, information items for the committee. Seeing none. Number 7, emerging issues, pardon me. Seeing none. Item 8 on the agenda is adjournment. Thank you all for attending this evening. Administration, thank you for your work. Council, thank you for your work this evening. And I'll now adjourn the meeting at approximately 7:14 p.m. Thank you. Have a nice